Hollywood is an interesting place. Behind all the glitz and the glamour, we all know there's no shortage of scandals and wrongdoings. In fact, in today's day and age, we've sort of gotten used to it all and often just shrug it off like it's nothing. But if you take a look back at history, there's one scandal that completely changed Hollywood for decades to come. It scared the industry into thinking it might all be over, causing them to react in a way that had disastrous consequences for many individuals. In this video, we're talking about the case of Fatty Arbuckle and how studios took over many people's lives by abusing their very controversial morality clause. We have a bunch to talk about, so let's dive into it. In the early days of Hollywood, sure, there were probably scandals, but most people point back to the case of Fatty Arbuckle and Virginia Rappe as the first major one. It all starts on September 5th, 1921. A normal day for most people, but it was a day that would be cemented in Hollywood's history forever, for all the wrong reasons. On this day, Roscoe Arbuckle, more commonly known by his nickname, Fatty Arbuckle, was heading out to San Francisco for another wild weekend of partying. By this time, Fatty was already a very famous person in Hollywood. Everyone recognized him since he had appeared in over 150 films. And he wasn't just an actor, he was a director and a screenwriter as well. On this day, Fatty was staying in the infamous room 1219 of the St. Francis Hotel, a room so infamous that there is even a book about this entire ordeal titled Room 1219. At around noon, Virginia Rappe, a former fashion model and designer turned movie actress, arrived at the hotel. Keep in mind that even though this was during the era of prohibition, alcohol wasn't difficult to come by, especially for celebrities of the time. So as you'd expect, there was a bunch of boozing going on. We're not going to go into too much detail about what happened. That was for 3 separate juries across 3 separate trials to go over, but just know that all didn't end well. At one point during the day, Virginia Rappe went into Fatty's room. The door was locked and the rest was history. After what happened in that room, Fatty was accused of the SA and manslaughter of Virginia. This was the first major celebrity scandal to reach such a status. It became a media frenzy that captured the public's interest. Think the O.J. Simpson trial or Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, but with no prior art to compare to. The trials ran from November of 1921 to April of 1922. The first 2 resulted in a hung jury, with the 3rd trial acquitting Fatty. But despite his acquittal, the court of public opinion had its own opinion, which resulted in Fatty's reputation being tarnished and his career basically being over. At the time, he did have support from various celebrities such as Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton because he helped them get into and establish in the film industry, but their support didn't help much. He still ended up working in the film industry under this trial, but it was under the pseudonym William Goodrich. But okay, besides this scandal being so widely publicized and capturing the public's interest, why was it so pivotal in shaping Hollywood for decades to come? So we're gonna get to that in a moment, but before we do, we have to talk about an era of Hollywood known as the Hollywood studio system. The film industry has gone through various eras. For example, during the 1970s, we saw a shift from studios to directors as being the creative force behind films. This was known as the New Hollywood era. Right now, we're in the modern era, but in the early days of Hollywood, when major studios were being formed and seizing control over the industry, we were in an era that is now known as the Hollywood studio system. At this time, there were 5 major and 3 smaller studios in Hollywood that basically controlled everything related to their films. From the production, to the distribution, to even which talent was being signed on by each studio, they controlled it all. There's a great article by Studio Binder that I'll link below in the description that goes into a lot more detail about this if you're interested. To give you a sense of how much control studios had, during this time, studios even owned their own theaters to play their own movies. If you ran an independent theater, studios would require you to purchase the rights to a package of their films. You couldn't just purchase the rights to one. These packages usually came with 5 films, which often included 1 or 2 good ones, with 3 or 4 that weren't as desirable. And everyone working for a studio, which included the actors and directors, were signed on with a contract, and they were paid a salary as opposed to what we've become used to now, where actors are often paid per film. All of this gave full creative and financial control to the studios. So along comes this massive Fatty Arbuckle scandal that really begins to tarnish not only his reputation, but the reputation of Paramount Pictures, who he was signed with at the time. And it even starts to tarnish the entire film industry's reputation. So studios freaked out and basically said, no, we can't be having this type of risk. We're paying these actors exorbitant amounts of money. We can't be having them acting like this and risking our reputation. Just for some context, these actors were getting paid a lot at the time. Fatty was signed on to Paramount Pictures for $1 million a year, which is equivalent to about $14.6 million in 2022. Keep in mind that the average salary for Americans in 1920 was only about $3,270. Hopefully this puts into perspective just how much these actors were making, because it's an important part going forward in this story. So it really made sense why studios wanted to place more control over them. Not just because they were paying them so much, but also because of the fear that they could really put a dent into their reputation and financial success. So this is where we get to the very controversial morality clause, also known as the morals clause, the bad boy clause, or the bad girl clause. The first studio to include this in their contracts for their talent was Universal, and the clause read like this: the actor or actress agrees to conduct themselves with due regard to public conventions and morals, and agrees that they will not do or commit anything tending to degrade them in society or bring them into public hatred, contempt, score or ridicule, or tending to shock, insult or offend the community or outrage morals of decency, or tending to the prejudice of the Universal Film Manufacturing Company or the motion picture industry. Whew, that's a mouthful. And if this clause was breached, Universal Films had the right to cancel and annul the contract by giving just 5 days notice to the actor or actress of their intention to do so. If you paid close attention, you may have noticed that the clause was very, very ambiguous, and I imagine this was on purpose. What are public conventions? What could degrade them in society? What are things that could bring public hatred? No one really knew, and actors and actresses really had to stay on their toes. A lot was left open to interpretation, and this allowed studios to abuse their newfound power in a way that gave up control of actors' lives to the studio. This clause wasn't just a warning, it was the studio's way of holding a magnifying glass over their stars' lives. Anything that rubbed the public the wrong way or went against society's unwritten rule book, boom, breach of the morality clause, and boom, you're probably fired. So just imagine being an actor or actress back then. When you were signing on with a studio, you weren't just signing up for movie roles. You were signing away a big chunk of your personal life and freedom. And just like I mentioned, these celebrities were getting paid significant amounts of money. Money that just a few years ago they couldn't have even imagined earning. A lot of them came from middle-class families where people worked laborious jobs just to get by. They knew what they could go back to if they ended up breaching this clause, and they didn't want that. They were living like kings and queens and didn't want to risk losing it all. And studios knew this, so they took control. Okay, sure, it wasn't all bad. There was still a lot of glitz and glamour at the time, and it really was a decision by the actors and actresses to abide by all these rules because they just wanted to keep living that good life. But when you take a step back and just listen to some of the things that studios were controlling, or dare I say dictating, it's kind of sad. There's a great article that goes into more detail about this written by CBS that will be linked in the description, but let's dive into some of it. Relationships and family planning were a huge part of what studios had control over. Studios were controlling who you dated or married. And if you were already married, divorces were discouraged because it could tarnish your reputation and cause an unwanted media frenzy, so some people were stuck in relationships that were unhealthy. Because of this, there was a decent amount of adultery going on behind the scenes. And for actors and actresses that were gay, lavender marriages were arranged to try and conceal their sexuality. For those who don't know what that is, it's basically a marriage where a man and a woman get married despite their sexual orientation to conceal the truth or just for the purpose of convenience. Family planning was also in the studio's territory. When you could have a child was something studios tried to control. Because the studio system implemented this sort of assembly line style of film production where movies were constantly being made, having an actress take time away to take care of a baby could result in a huge financial hit, especially if they were very famous. And if an actress was considered a sex icon or bombshell, they were also discouraged from having children to preserve this image. Having kids before marriage was also discouraged because of the stigma it had associated with it. And because of all these concerns around having children, studios nudged actresses to have abortions. They were so common, in fact, that Marlene Dietrich is quoted in Carrie Beauchamp's book, Without Lying Down, Frances Marion and the Powerful Woman of Hollywood, as saying that abortion was our birth control. And to hide all of this, Hollywood had fixers or scandal erasers that would work to conceal that an actress was undertaking this procedure. Sometimes you'd see an actress be hospitalized for appendectomy or take some time off due to fatigue, but surprise, surprise, that wasn't the real reason. And speaking of fixers, there was also a lot of hush money going around at the time. If actors were getting in trouble, money would often be paid to keep things quiet. Things like driving under the influence or domestic abuse are just some examples. Studios even had control over what their talent could wear in public and how much they could weigh. And if you were an actress that was considered a sex or fashion icon, you were put under even more scrutiny. Some actresses were forbidden from wearing pants in public just to try and maintain their feminine image. And finally, on top of all the things I just mentioned, actors and actresses were given uppers so they could stay up and work the long hours required to keep this assembly line of content running. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on at the time. Like, can you even imagine your employer dictating who you date or how you dress or even how much you weigh? But here's the thing. Even today, with all the body positivity and diversity and increased acceptance of people in all walks of life, there's still some control going on. It may not necessarily be written down in a contract, but it's there. We've heard celebrities talk about how they had to lean out or bulk up to get a certain role. Christian Bale for Batman or Chris Pratt for Star-Lord are just two examples. During the 80s, once Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone took over the big screen, it seemed like if you wanted to be a huge blockbuster action hero, you had to be jacked, which often meant you had to start juicing. We've also heard about how Kate Winslet had to lose weight for her role in Titanic and how James Cameron would call her Kate Weighs a lot. The studios might not have direct contractual control over as many things as they used to, but the influence is still there in the form of, if you want to be part of my movie, you have to look like this or behave like that. It's not explicitly spelled out, but there is an implicit understanding that for certain roles, you just have to do it. And us, the viewers, don't really help in this regard either. We've also heard of studios like Disney having lists of things you cannot say or do in public if you want to continue being a Disney star. And on the topic of scandals, there are still scandals that continue to happen that could ruin your career. Take the entire Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case. It didn't really matter if they were talented or not. Because their image was tarnished, studios would no longer pick them up. And the issues with scandals is that even if they're not true, it can cost you your career because the public's opinion might have already changed. And that's very difficult to change back. So are we in a better place than we were back then during the Hollywood studio system? For sure, but studios still have a lot of control. It's not always by contract, but it's still there in the form of whether they want to deal with you or not. And that's the story of the first major celebrity scandal and how it changed Hollywood for decades to come. Thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on all of this? Was there anything that we missed? Make sure to leave a comment and we'll be sure to join in on the conversation. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got a ton of cool videos releasing regularly and would hate for you to miss out. Also, if you want to help support the channel even further, we have a Patreon with some cool perks in the description. And until next time, have a good one.